They locked me in the cellar of their mansion, accusing me of betraying their son. My mother-in-law smiled as she ordered the guards to turn the key. Her eyes colder than the snow outside. They thought I was powerless, forgotten. But what they didn't know, my mother was already on her way, and she wasn't coming alone. She brought justice, faith, and a German shepherd who would change everything. Stay until the very end, because what happened next will leave you breathless. Trust me, you don't want to miss how faith turned into fire and how love broke through the ice. Now, let me take you back to where it all began. My name is Claire, and this is the story of how I learned that the darkest nights often hide God's brightest miracles. Follow our channel, leave a comment, and share this story, because someone out there still needs to believe that miracles are real. Snow fell in delicate spirals over the Mercer estate, a grand stone mansion resting beneath a sky cut with cold stars. Music drifted through the frosted windows, soft violins, the echo of wealth pretending to be grace. Inside, the winter gala had begun. Claire Bennett stood at the top of the staircase, a fragile silhouette framed by crystal chandeliers. Her gray ash eyes, calm, reflective, like a frozen lake, swept across the glittering crowd. She was a quiet beauty, with pale skin kissed by northern light, and long chestnut hair pinned in a loose bun that refused perfection. Her satin ivory gown shimmered with restraint. The silver fur stole around her shoulders was the only rebellion she allowed herself. She had married into the Mercers, one of Montana's oldest families, 2 years ago. Yet even tonight, surrounded by champagne and candlelight, Claire still felt like a visitor who had overstayed her welcome. Daniel Mercer appeared beside her, his tall frame confident yet weary. He was handsome in the way of men who had once worked with their hands, broad-shouldered, tanned, with a jaw that still bore faint scars from a rodeo accident. The accident, long before his father's passing, had ended his reckless youth and carved a quiet caution into his voice. He loved Claire, but too gently, too passively. Where she longed for defense, he offered silence. "Smile," he whispered now, eyes fixed on the ballroom below. "Mother hates when you look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "I'd rather be anywhere else," Claire murmured, but smiled anyway. Below them, Margot Mercer glided through the crowd like a swan among sparrows. Her white fox fur coat shimmered against her black gown, her hair, silver and deliberate, coiled high like a crown. The matriarch of the Mercer line, Margot had learned long ago that cruelty, when dressed in civility, was called class. Her lips barely moved as she smiled. Her blue eyes were ice chips behind diamond lashes. At her side drifted Sloane Mercer, Daniel's younger sister. At 27, she was the kind of woman society papers called effortless. In truth, nothing about Sloane was effortless. Every curl of her blonde hair, every tilt of her porcelain chin was choreographed to suggest superiority. Her laughter, light, brittle, could slice the air thinner than any blade. The string quartet shifted to a waltz. Guests began to dance. Politicians, oil heirs, charity patrons with teeth too white and hearts too hollow. Claire descended the stairs, Daniel following, their reflections trembling in the marble floors. When Margot spotted them, her smile spread like frost across glass. "Darling," she called, voice sweet and venomous. "Our favorite outsider graces us at last." Polite laughter rippled around the nearby guests. Claire bowed her head slightly, trained long enough to know resistance would only feed them. "It's a lovely evening, Mrs. Mercer," she said softly. "Indeed," Margot replied, eyes glinting. "Let's hope it stays that way." For a while, it did. The evening unfolded in golden rhythm. Laughter, clinking glasses, the hum of strings. But beneath the warmth, something darker stirred. Claire felt it before she saw it. A tension, a shift in the air, as though the walls themselves inhaled. The music stopped. Margot tapped her crystal glass. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, "as guardian of this family's reputation, I must speak a difficult truth." A hush spread like wildfire. Daniel frowned, stepping forward. "Mother," Margot raised a manicured hand, "please, this concerns all of us." The LED screen behind the orchestra flickered to life. The crowd turned. A grainy image appeared. A woman in a winter coat, her hair loose, her arms around a man in the parking lot outside the Mercer estate. The timestamp read, "Last night, 11:42 p.m." The woman looked like Claire. A collective gasp. Sloane's voice cut through it like silk on steel. "Caught in the snow, weren't you, sister?" Whispers rippled, quick and cruel. "That's her. With the groundskeeper, maybe? How shameful." Claire's breath froze. The room spun, the chandeliers blurring into rings of light. "It's not me," she said quietly, her voice trembling but steady. "That's not me." Margot's fan snapped shut with finality. "For the dignity of this family," she announced, "we will confirm the truth. Here. Now." Daniel's eyes darted to Claire, desperate, confused, afraid. But he said nothing. His silence fell heavier than any accusation. Claire looked at him for a heartbeat, long enough to see the man she'd believed in vanish behind fear. The pity in her gaze was colder than anger. 2 guards stepped forward. Curtains were drawn across the windows. The chandeliers dimmed to a cruel theatrical light. The ballroom became a courtroom. Claire's voice broke the stillness, soft and haunting, almost a prayer. "That is not me." Her words were swallowed by the storm of whispers. Cameras flashed. The truth, fragile and pure, shattered under the weight of spectacle. And as the snow outside thickened against the glass, Claire realized the stars above Mercer Hall were not blessings tonight. They were witnesses. The storm came with a voice. It howled over the Mercer estate, scraping its claws across the shutters and roaring down the chimneys. In the granite cellar beneath the ballroom, the sound was a muffled heartbeat, constant, cruel, and cold. Claire Bennett sat on the stone floor, knees drawn to her chest. Her ivory satin gown was gone. In its place, she wore a thin wool coat, far too small, and her silver fur scarf wound tight around her neck like a memory of warmth. Every breath left a ghost on the air. The iron door, thick as a vault, trembled occasionally when the wind screamed. A single oil lamp burned in the corner, its flame flickering yellow against gray walls. Above it, a grandfather clock ticked. Each click another insult to her patience, another second spent waiting for mercy that would never come. She whispered once, only to herself, "They'll realize it's not me. They have to." But her voice fell flat. Even her echo refused to return. Hours passed, or perhaps a lifetime. Claire had lost track of time when the door creaked. Light from the corridor sliced through the gloom, revealing Daniel Mercer framed in gold and shadow. He looked older than he had at the party, the stubble rough on his jaw, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands trembling as though the truth itself burned him. He stepped inside, hesitating. "They said it's temporary," he muttered. "Until the sheriff arrives in the morning." Claire looked up. "Do you believe them?" Daniel's throat worked, but no words came. The silence was worse than betrayal. It was cowardice, shaped like care. Finally, he crouched beside her, voice cracking. "I'm trapped, Claire, between my mother and what's right. She's not well when her name is threatened." Claire smiled faintly, though her lips trembled. "The truth doesn't need a place to stand, Daniel. It stands on its own." He flinched. That quiet sentence carried more weight than a scream. When he left, the door shut with the sound of judgment. The bolt slid home. Claire exhaled shakily, the frost curling in her lap like a sigh from God himself. She rose and crossed to the narrow window, a slit of frost-rimmed iron bars. Beyond it lay the storm, trees bent under snow like tired saints. The world was white, endless, indifferent. Then she saw movement, a shape in the snow, far off near the stables. For a moment, she thought it was a wolf, but its posture was different. Alert, intelligent. A dog, perhaps. Its ears caught the wind. It looked toward the house as if it could feel her. Then it vanished into the forest. Something in Claire stirred. Not hope exactly, but something close. Something like a prayer with legs. She returned to the wall and sat again, tracing the rough mortar with her fingertips. Her skin was numb, her mind alive with fragments, memories of Oregon, her mother's laughter, the smell of cedar after rain. Those memories were warmth. Her mother, Vivian Hale, that unbreakable woman who once stitched soldiers back to life during the war, would never believe her daughter's silence. She would come. Claire didn't know how she knew it. She just did. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving Vivian with a wounded heart but iron resolve. Vivian had raised Claire alone, teaching her that dignity wasn't what others gave. It was what you refused to surrender. Now, in the cellar, that lesson came back, like the rhythm of an old hymn. The door rattled again. It wasn't Daniel this time. A man stepped in, his dark coat heavy with snow, a lantern swinging in his gloved hand. He was one of the estate's guards. Mason Carver, broad-shouldered, with lines etched deep around his eyes from years in the cold. Once a sheriff's deputy, he had left the force after losing his brother in a mining collapse that he blamed himself for. Since then, Mason had followed orders too well, terrified of his own conscience. He placed a small tray of food near her. "Mrs. Mercer said you should eat," he said, his voice low but rough, like gravel in a prayer. Claire didn't answer. She looked at him, really looked, and saw something flicker there. Not cruelty, shame. "Do you have children, Mason?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "A daughter, 12, lives with her mother in Butte." "Then you know," Claire whispered. "You know what truth looks like when everyone else calls it a lie." He looked down. For a long second, the only sound was the wind clawing at the walls. Then, without meeting her eyes, he muttered, "I'll keep the lamp burning." When he left, the door closed, but this time it didn't lock. Claire sat for a while, staring at the lamp's flame. She wasn't sure if Mason had done it on purpose, but in that faint oversight, she heard something divine, a message passed through fear and kindness. She stood, walked to the window again, and pressed her palm against the cold glass. With one trembling finger, she drew a single word in the frost. "Mother." Outside, as if in answer, the wind carried a distant sound, half howl, half bark. Not a wolf, a dog. Searching, finding. And somewhere in the blizzard beyond Mercer Hall, hope began to move. The road between Wyoming and Montana lay swallowed by snow, a white labyrinth twisting through mountains that had forgotten color. The storm had not eased. It prowled. Wind howled like wolves starved of the moon, carrying flakes sharp as glass across the windshield of a convoy of black SUVs. At the front, Vivian Hale drove in silence. She was 55, her beauty carved by endurance rather than vanity. Her hair, silver gold, was pulled into a low twist beneath a fur-lined hood. Her eyes, iron gray, held the clarity of someone who had seen war and lived to name it mercy. The lines on her face were not age, but evidence, a map of nights spent awake over battlefield tents and boardroom tables. Her black wool coat, tailored to precision, spoke of money. Her sable scarf around her neck spoke of command. But tonight, even in the armor of wealth, she looked less like a tycoon and more like what she truly was, a mother answering a call older than fear. In the back seat sat Atlas, her German shepherd, 6 years old, chest broad, fur thick as the pines they passed. His coat was a mixture of sable and gold, and the old leather harness he wore bore faint scratches from years of service beside her. His amber eyes, bright and intelligent, shifted constantly between the storm outside and Vivian's reflection in the mirror, as if he, too, understood the gravity of where they were going. "Easy, boy," Vivian murmured, her gloved hand reaching back to brush his muzzle. Atlas pressed his head into her palm, a quiet vow of trust. The convoy slowed as the iron gates of the Mercer estate emerged from the white void. The snow swirled around them like ghosts reluctant to move on. A guard stepped out of the security booth, wrapped in a parka, his flashlight trembling slightly under the wind. He was young, barely 30, with a soft southern drawl and a posture that said obedience came before conscience. "Ma'am," he called, "you'll need clearance. This property's closed tonight. Vivian lowered her window. The storm rushed in, biting cold air filling the space. I don't need clearance, she said. Her voice was calm, but it carried like steel through fog. I'm here for my daughter. The guard blinked, uncertain. Mrs. Mercer said. Vivian cut him off gently. I didn't come to ask Margot Mercer for permission. I came to take back what she stole. There was a moment of silence, the kind that decides fates. Then Atlas growled. A low, thunderous rumble that made the guard step back. Vivian's lips curved, not in cruelty, but in purpose. Tell Mrs. Mercer, she said, that I brought something stronger than her name. A mother's right. She stepped out into the storm. The snow swallowed her heels instantly, the sable scarf whipping behind her like a banner of defiance. Atlas moved ahead of her, his paws leaving deep prints in the snow. His nose twitched, following a scent trail buried beneath ice and a distance. He led her past the stables, around the greenhouse glowing faintly through frost, and down toward the lower courtyard where the old granite walls met the earth. Vivian followed without hesitation. Each step sank deep, but she pressed on, her breath coming in white plumes. When Atlas stopped before a thick steel door, half hidden behind ivy, she knew. This is it, she whispered. Atlas barked once, sharp, triumphant. Vivian raised her fist and pounded on the door. Claire! Her voice cracked for the first time that night. Claire, it's me! A pause. Then, faint, trembling, a voice from within. Mother. Vivian's gloved hands moved faster than reason. She pulled a compact tool from her coat, a small emergency lockpick she had carried since her days as a combat medic. Within seconds, the latch gave way with a metallic gasp. The door opened. The room reeked of damp stone and despair. A single lamp flickered in the corner, its glow barely touching the edges. Claire was crouched against the wall, her face pale, her lips blue. The silver scarf she'd been wearing was wrapped tight around her shoulders. Mom, she whispered, disbelief and relief colliding in her throat. Vivian dropped to her knees before her daughter, hands trembling as she pulled the sable scarf from her own neck and placed it gently around Claire's shoulders. You don't have to prove yourself to people who measure hearts with ice. Claire's tears froze halfway down her cheeks. She reached for her mother's hand, clinging as though to warmth itself. And then, Atlas moved. The dog padded forward, quiet as reverence, and pressed his massive head into Claire's lap. He gave a soft, mournful whine, then looked up with eyes that reflected the lamp's golden light. Claire buried her fingers into his fur, the first true warmth she'd felt in days. Vivian smiled faintly through her tears. He's been restless all night. I think he knew where to find you before I did. His name? Claire asked softly. Atlas, Vivian said. He never loses his way. The wind outside howled again, but this time it sounded almost like applause. They stood together, mother, daughter, and the golden shepherd, framed by the flickering light and the snow beyond. For a long moment, there were no words, only the shared rhythm of breathing. Vivian wrapped her arm around Claire, whispering, "We're leaving tonight, and no one will ever lock you in darkness again." Atlas turned toward the door, tail low, but ready. His body a shadow of vigilance. The storm outside raged, but the cold no longer mattered. For the first time in days, Claire's heart began to thaw. The storm had quieted by morning, leaving the Mercer estate draped in a silence so heavy it seemed carved from ice. In the grand ballroom, chandeliers glittered like constellations trapped beneath a glass sky. The marble floors gleamed, freshly polished, as if the night's cruelty could be scrubbed away by servants with trembling hands. Guests began to arrive again, lured by an invitation from Vivian Hale herself. A note written in silver ink promising clarity and reconciliation. In a world obsessed with spectacle, no one could resist watching a scandal bleed into redemption. Margot Mercer descended the staircase in her white mink coat, diamonds flashing like icicles at her throat. Her face, meticulously painted, betrayed only the faintest tremor in the muscles around her mouth. She had not slept. Pride kept her upright where guilt could not. Beside her, Sloane Mercer looked radiant and sharp, dressed in a sequined silver gown that mirrored her mother's chill. Her hair was pinned high, her smile stretched thin. She glanced at the crowd, their murmurs slicing through the room like cold drafts, and whispered, "We should never have agreed to this." Margot replied, without turning her head, "Never show fear, darling. It's the one currency the poor can't afford." The great oak doors opened. The orchestra ceased mid-tune. Vivian Hale entered first. She was dressed in a charcoal wool coat lined with sable, her silver hair gleaming like frost in the chandelier light. There was no jewelry, only a simple pearl brooch at her collar, understated and disarming. Behind her walked Atlas, the German shepherd, stride even and deliberate, his tail low, his amber eyes glowing with alert calm. The sight of the animal caused a ripple among the guests. Dogs were not welcome in Mercer Hall, but no one dared protest. Vivian stopped at the center of the ballroom, where last night's humiliation had played out. Her presence filled the silence with authority, more commanding than any title. "Good morning," she began, her voice quiet, but carrying. "I understand this household values appearances, so let's make everything perfectly visible." She gestured to her assistant, Evelyn Cross, a composed woman in her 40s with sharp cheekbones, dark auburn hair, and the air of someone who had spent too many years cleaning up other people's messes. Evelyn approached a nearby console and pressed a button. Instantly, the ballroom's enormous LED screens flickered to life. At first, only static. Then an image appeared. Grainy surveillance footage from a small parking lot outside a rented film studio in Bozeman. The room went still as the recording played. It showed Sloane Mercer, wrapped in a designer trench coat, slipping an envelope of cash to a man in a gray cap. The camera zoomed in. The man resembled Daniel's ranch manager, but the timestamp was different from the supposed affair footage. Another video replaced it, inside the studio. Under bright lights, a woman with the same build as Claire stood beside the same man. A green screen behind them. Sloane's voice echoed faintly. "Make sure the timestamp reads last night." The room froze. The next slide showed receipts, payment for the studio, for digital editing, for scene production. Then the coup de grace. GPS data from Claire's phone proving she had been 30 miles away at the time, visiting a wool supplier for her design project. A whisper rippled through the crowd, like wind across glass. Margot tried to laugh. It came out brittle. "This is absurd. Anyone could have—" Her words died as Vivian lifted a small recorder and pressed play. The voice that spilled from it was unmistakable. Margot's. "She'll learn tonight. You can't marry into this family without being tested. Lock her up if you must. She'll thank us when she learns her place." For a heartbeat, the room was motionless. Then the crystal in Margot's glass shattered as Daniel dropped it, his hand trembling. "Mother," he breathed. "What have you done?" Margot stepped back, eyes wild, her composure cracking like ice under strain. "I did it for you, for our name. She was beneath us." Atlas barked once, deep, resonant, final. The sound echoed off the vaulted ceiling like a gavel strike. Guests flinched. Even Margot went pale. Vivian's voice remained soft. Justice doesn't shout. It only needs light. She turned toward the projection again. A new document appeared. The deed to the Mercer estate. The Hale capital emblem shone at the top. I bought your debts, Mrs. Mercer, Vivian said evenly. Your mansion, your company, your transport routes, all collateral. For months now, this property has been under my name. Gasps erupted. A few guests began to film on their phones, scenting a headline. Vivian continued, calm amid the chaos. You didn't just imprison my daughter. You did it in a house you no longer own. Margot's knees buckled. Sloane stared in disbelief, the sharp edges of her pride collapsing. Daniel looked from his mother to Vivian, then to Claire, who stood quietly at the doorway, pale but unbroken. His lips parted, but no apology could survive the weight of truth. Vivian looked to the crowd. What you call punishment, she said, I call inheritance, because cruelty always comes home. Atlas stepped forward, gaze fixed on Margot, tail still. In his silence, there was judgment. The chandeliers trembled as if even the crystals understood the verdict. Outside, the snow began to fall again. Slow, deliberate, like the world itself was holding its breath. The Mercer estate stood under a gray sky, the crystal chandeliers inside glowing faintly through frost-bitten windows. The echoes of truth still hung in the air from Vivian's revelation. Now came the reckoning. At the foot of the grand staircase, Thomas Alder, Vivian's lead attorney, arranged his files. He was a man in his early 50s, tall, sharp-featured, with streaks of silver in his hair, and the quiet precision of someone who lived by order and clause. His tailored navy coat contrasted with the rawness of the winter outside, and his black leather briefcase, scuffed at the edges from decades of battle, was the only thing that bore his age. Mrs. Hale, he murmured, voice calm and resonant. We're ready. Vivian nodded once. Behind her, Claire stood with Atlas pressed close to her leg. The dog's breath formed soft clouds in the cold. Thomas stepped forward, his tone measured but commanding. By order of Gallatin County, and in the presence of verified evidence, the charges are as follows: unlawful imprisonment, defamation, digital manipulation, and emotional abuse. Gasps rippled across the crowd of guests, still lingering in stunned silence. At that moment, the doors opened again, letting in a gust of wind and snow. A uniformed man entered, Sheriff Cole Hanley, a seasoned officer in his late 40s, with a square jaw and eyes that had seen too much of human frailty. His brown leather duster was dusted with snow, and the star on his chest caught the light like a cold promise. "Evenin', folks," he said simply, voice low and steady. "Heard we've got justice to serve." He looked from Vivian to Margot, and the silence became a living thing between them. Margot Mercer, still dressed like royalty fallen from grace, stood motionless near the fireplace. Her pearls had dulled, her skin pale against her white fur. The arrogance that once armored her had turned brittle, cracking under its own weight. Yet even now, her chin was lifted in defiance, a queen refusing to kneel before the inevitable. Sloane Mercer, in contrast, was a portrait of collapse, her makeup streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she clutched a crystal flute that had long gone empty. She tried to speak, but her voice splintered. "I didn't mean," she began. Vivian turned to her, eyes soft but unrelenting. "You meant everything you did, child. You just didn't mean to get caught." The sheriff took a step closer. "Mrs. Mercer, Miss Mercer, you're both under investigation for unlawful detainment and falsified evidence. You'll come with me to give statements." Margot exhaled, slow and bitter. "You have no idea who you're talking to." Sheriff Hanley's jaw tightened. "Ma'am, I've put cuffs on senators. You're just another name tonight." The crowd shifted, whispers rising again like a tide. No one could stop. Vivian stepped outside onto the snow-covered terrace. The wind tugged at her sable scarf, making it billow like a banner of victory. She turned back to face the people who had once ruled this mountain like tyrants of ice. "I didn't steal anything from you," she said, her voice carrying over the wind. "I only reclaimed what frost had devoured: decency, truth, and my daughter's dignity." Her attorney handed her a document stamped with Hale Capital's seal. She unfolded it and began to read aloud. "As of this morning, I hereby suspend the Mercer family's rights to the management of Mercer Transport Holdings. Effective immediately, all assets will be reassigned to a new trust, the Winter Justice Foundation, created to aid victims of coercion and abuse. My daughter, Claire Bennett, will serve as executive director." The announcement fell like thunder. Gasps, murmurs, then applause. Quiet, hesitant at first, but real. Claire stepped forward, her expression calm, yet trembling at the edges. She met Daniel's eyes, his face raw, stripped of all pretense. Snow caught in his dark hair, his breath fogged with regret. I was weak, he said, voice breaking. Cowardly. I thought silence would protect peace. I see now, it only protects cruelty. Claire's gaze softened, her voice gentle but unwavering. Cowardice isn't a life sentence, Daniel. Only if you choose not to change. He nodded, tears glinting under the pale light. Then I'll start by standing with you. Atlas barked once, short and strong, the sound of the wind itself shifting. Sheriff Hanley guided the Mercer women toward his waiting car. Sloane sobbed quietly. Margot didn't look back. For the first time, her heels sank into snow, leaving deep prints behind her. Proof that even the proudest fall leaves a mark. Vivian turned to her daughter, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. The storm's breaking, she said softly. Claire looked up. The clouds were thinning, light bleeding through like forgiveness. She smiled faintly. Maybe it's not the storm breaking, Mom. Maybe it's us. Finally, breathing again. The wind rose, curling through the air like a hymn. Atlas lifted his head, eyes bright, fur rippling in the cold. He stood tall beside them, the silent witness of justice restored. 6 months later, the town of Jackson Hole had learned to glow beneath winter instead of hiding from it. The sun hung low, filtering through glass domes and snow-powdered pines. Beneath one such dome stood the new Winter Testament Center, a haven built from courage and reclamation. Light poured through the arched ceiling, scattering into thousands of pale reflections. Inside, laughter replaced the echoes of sorrow. Women, young and old, spoke in warm, brave tones. Each carried a story stitched together from pieces of fear and survival. At the center of the hall hung a framed photograph, 3 figures against a backdrop of snow. Vivian Hale, dignified in a midnight blue coat, her gray sable scarf curled like a crown. Claire Bennett, serene beside her, wearing a cream overcoat and a faint, forgiving smile. And at their feet, Atlas, the 6-year-old German shepherd, chestnut and black fur glinting beneath his new canine guardian badge. His image, frozen in motion, looked ready to leap straight from the frame to protect them all over again. Claire stood by the podium now, reviewing her speech. Her hair had grown longer, falling past her shoulders in soft, steady waves. Her eyes, once gray with exhaustion, now shimmered with quiet light. The scars of her past hadn't vanished. They had simply healed into purpose. Across the room, Vivian was speaking to donors, her tone graceful but grounded. Time had softened the steel in her voice, turning it into something more enduring, a kind of wisdom carved by pain and patience. "Mother," Claire called softly. "It's almost time." Vivian turned, her smile carrying pride and the faint exhaustion of someone who had carried mountains and decided to put them down. "You'll do beautifully, darling. This is your season now." The doors opened behind them, letting in a gust of wind, and a man who looked as though the cold still lived inside him. Daniel Mercer. He hesitated at the threshold, brushing snow from his worn jacket. The fine suits and polished shoes of his past were gone. His coat was frayed, his boots scuffed, and the calluses on his hands spoke of hard labor. A faint stubble shadowed his face. The once slick confidence in his eyes had been replaced by humility and something deeper, the ache of redemption. Vivian noticed him first. She did not smile, but neither did she turn him away. She simply said, "You came." "I did," Daniel murmured. "I work down at the freight yard now, loading trucks, fixing chains." He glanced toward Claire, his voice low. "I've been learning to listen. To others. To silence. To myself." Claire regarded him quietly. The air between them was no longer sharp, just still. "That's good," she said at last. "Listening's where healing starts." He exhaled, a breath visible in the cold air still clinging to him. "I came to see what you built, to say I'm proud and sorry." Before he could continue, Atlas rose from his spot near the podium. The dog approached with deliberate grace, each step a test, each pause a question. He stopped before Daniel, nostrils flaring, as if measuring sincerity. Daniel crouched, hand trembling. Atlas sniffed once, twice, then pressed his nose against Daniel's palm, a gesture of ancient forgiveness. The room watched in silence. It was as if the wind itself bowed its head. Vivian spoke softly, her tone unreadable but kind. "He doesn't give second chances easily. You must have earned that one." Daniel smiled faintly. "Maybe that's a start." As the crowd gathered for the inauguration ceremony, soft piano music drifted through the hall. Snowflakes slid down the glass dome above, catching sunlight like falling diamonds. Claire took the podium, papers trembling slightly in her hands. She didn't look at them. Instead, she lifted her gaze to the faces before her, survivors, supporters, and strangers alike. "When I was locked in darkness," she began, her voice steady, "I thought I had been buried. But sometimes, when God hides you, it's not in a grave. It's in the soil, so you can grow." The room fell silent, the kind of silence that listens. I was told I had to prove myself to people who measured worth in status, not in truth. But the moment they tried to strip me of dignity, they only revealed what couldn't be taken. She paused, glancing toward Vivian and Atlas. They thought they'd silenced me, but God placed a star in that darkness, shaped like a mother's courage and a dog's faith. A tear slid down her cheek, and she let it stay. If you are cold, if you are afraid, if you are tired of being unseen, come here. We have fire built from truth. Applause rose, not loud, but deep. It was the sound of souls exhaling together. Outside, snow began to fall again. Slow, soft, cleansing. Atlas lay at the foot of the stage, eyes half closed, chest rising in calm rhythm. Vivian and Claire stood side by side, their scarves brushing in the breeze that slipped through the open doors. Daniel remained near the entrance, watching the two women who had turned ruin into light. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell rang, a sound as old as forgiveness, and as the final notes of a piano waltz floated through the air. The audience looked up to the dome, where the sunlight fractured through snowflakes into 1,000 tiny embers. The fire upon the snow burned quietly, tender and eternal. God does not always speak in thunder. He speaks in the hush between storms, through a mother's courage, a daughter's forgiveness, and the steady faith of a loyal dog. What happened to Claire was more than justice. It was a miracle born from pain. Every heartbreak that draws you closer to truth is a door He opens. Every winter that strips you bare is His way of showing what still endures within you. When the world locks you in darkness, remember this: God never loses sight of you. He sends His angels, with wings, with paws, and with the strength He planted in your soul. As the snow falls outside your window tonight, breathe deeply and let your heart remember. Even in the coldest season, there is a fire waiting within you to rise again. If this story touched your heart, share it to bring warmth to someone else's winter. Comment below and tell us where you found light when life grew dark. And if you believe in faith, redemption, and love that endures all storms, subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage and divine grace. May God bless you, fill your home with peace, and keep your spirit burning bright. For miracles still walk among us, beneath the snow and within the heart.